It was a warm Saturday morning when everything began. The kind of day where the sun feels soft instead of harsh and the air smells like fresh grass. My daughter had just finished her college semester and decided to spend a few days at home to decompress. She loved quiet mornings, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea and watching the neighborhood wake up. I always enjoyed those mornings with her. They reminded me of when she was younger, full of questions and wonder, though now she was older, calmer and more thoughtful. We lived in a neighborhood that looked peaceful on the surface. Clean sidewalks, neatly trimmed lawns, and identical mailboxes. The kind of place where people waved politely but never really knew each other. But beneath that tidy exterior, there was always some level of tension because of the HOA, and at the center of most complaints, warnings, and neighborhood whispers was one person, our self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. People simply referred to her as Karen, though that wasn't her real name. Karen had a habit of turning minor moments into major problems. If someone's lawn grew a little too long, she posted about it on the neighborhood app. If someone parked slightly crooked, she sent out an email blast. She didn't exactly break rules, she just enforced them like they were life or death matters. To her, the HOA wasn't just a community guideline. It was a personal mission. Now, normally, I stayed out of her way. My work kept me busy, and I didn't feel the need to engage with the neighborhood politics. My daughter, meanwhile, had never met Karen. She'd only heard a few stories. The kind you tell half-jokingly at dinner when someone mentions neighbor drama. That morning, my daughter decided to take a walk around the block. She enjoyed stretching her legs, and it helped her clear her mind after weeks of studying. She wasn't loud, she wasn't blocking anyone's path, and she certainly wasn't causing trouble. She was simply walking earbuds in, hands tucked in her pockets, enjoying the weather. She'd barely made it halfway down the street when Karen spotted her. I wasn't there to see the moment it happened, but according to our neighbor across the road who told me the story, later Karen slowed her car to a crawl, rolled down her window and stared at my daughter like she was inspecting a suspicious package. Apparently, Karen even circled the block once, glaring again from another angle. My daughter didn't notice any of it. She was listening to her music, probably humming quietly the way she tends to do. When she returned home about 20 minutes later, she looked completely relaxed, unaware that she had been the center of someone else's dramatic assumptions. She went inside, grabbed a glass of cold water, and began telling me about the flowers blooming near the community pond. I smiled and listened, happy she felt peaceful. But while she was settling in, Karen was busy dialing the non-emergency police line. She didn't call about a crime. She didn't call because she saw something dangerous. She called because she didn't recognize the young woman walking around the neighborhood, her exact words, which I learned later. She told the dispatcher that a stranger was scoping out the houses and acting suspicious. Those descriptions didn't match anything my daughter was doing, but Karen's imagination tended to fill in details where no real issue existed. About an hour later, heard a knock at the door. Not loud, not alarming, just steady and professional. When I opened it, 2 officers stood on the porch. Friendly faces, calm, posture. They weren't tense or aggressive. They looked more confused than anything. "Good afternoon," one of them said politely. "We received a call from a neighbor, and we just wanted to confirm everything is all right." There was a report about someone unfamiliar walking around the area. My daughter, who had been in the living room reading a book, stood up and joined me. When she saw the officers, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Unfamiliar?" she repeated. "I live here. I grew up here." The officers nodded. "We figured it might be something like that. But we still have to check when someone calls." I could feel a small wave of irritation rising inside me, not at the officers, but at the unnecessary situation. They were just doing their job. Karen, on the other hand, had taken her usual overreactions to a new level. "Everything's fine," I assured them. "She's my daughter. She's home for the week." The officer glanced at my daughter, then back at me. "Honestly, that makes perfect sense. Sorry for the interruption." They apologized once more and left without any issue. My daughter let out a long sigh and sat back on the couch. "Do we really have neighbors calling the cops on people for walking?" she asked, half amused and half irritated. "Well," I replied, One neighbor does. I didn't want her stay to be ruined by frustration, so we brushed it off for the moment. She returned to her book, and it made us both something to snack on. For a while, it felt like the day was back to normal, but Karen wasn't finished. About an hour later, I saw her marching down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, wearing the expression of someone preparing to confront a major crisis. She stopped in front of our house and took photos of our front yard something. The HOA rules did not allow without permission. Then she scribbled notes furiously on her clipboard. I stepped onto the porch, not angrily, just calmly, and asked, "Is there something you need?" Karen looked up like she hadn't expected me to be there, as she replied sharply, "I need to know why there was an unfamiliar young woman wandering around the neighborhood. Several houses have had package theft issues recently, and we cannot allow suspicious behavior." "She's my daughter," I said evenly. "She lives here." Karen pursed her lips as if she didn't fully accept the explanation. Well, she should have let the HOA know she'd be staying. "All guests must be registered so the neighborhood remains safe and transparent." This was completely untrue. No such rule existed. The HOA rules specifically stated that long-term guests should notify the board if they plan to stay for over 30 days, nothing more. My daughter was staying for less than a week. "There's no rule about that," I replied politely. Karen narrowed her eyes. "Maybe not yet, but there should be. I will be bringing it up at the next meeting." She said it with the confidence of someone who expected applause. I stayed calm, though inside I felt a mix of annoyance and disbelief. "Before you do that," I said, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't call the police again over something perfectly normal." She wasn't doing anything suspicious. Karen straightened. "I call when I see something concerning. I take safety seriously. Not everyone cares about the neighborhood the way I do." And with that, she turned away, walking off with that same stiff, determined stride. My daughter joined me on the porch. Having heard most of the conversation through the open door, "She really thinks walking makes me suspicious?" she asked. I laughed softly. "She thinks everything is suspicious, unless she personally approves it." My daughter shook her head and leaned against the railing. "I'm going to be honest, I didn't think the stories were that dramatic. Now I see why everyone talks about her. This is normal for her," I said. "But don't worry about it. She can't do anything." 8. At that moment, I believed it. I truly thought Karen would move on after satisfying her ego. But the next morning proved me wrong, because when I stepped outside to get the mail, I found a bright yellow slip taped to my door, a formal HOA complaint. Karen had filed it less than 24 hours after calling the police, claiming that we had an unregistered individual staying at the property, causing potential security risks. She had even attached the photos she took of my daughter walking. My daughter saw the slip and groaned. "She really filed something?" "Looks like it," I said. The situation had gone from annoying to absurd. And unfortunately for Karen, she still had no idea who she was dealing with. She didn't know that in addition to being a peaceful neighbor and a calm parent, I also happened to be the judge who reviewed local disputes, including HOA matters. But I didn't reveal that. Not yet. Instead, I folded the slip, placed it neatly on the table, and told my daughter, "Right. Part of me wants to let this play out." "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied with a smile, "she's about to learn a lesson in fairness." The next few days were strangely calm, almost like the quiet moments right before a storm. My daughter tried to enjoy her visit, but I could tell she kept glancing toward the window every now and then, half wondering if Karen would reappear with another clipboard or another accusation. I didn't want her to feel uneasy in her own childhood home, so I did my best to keep the atmosphere light. Still, the complaint slip sat on my dining table like a bright yellow reminder that this wasn't over. I didn't tell my daughter the full extent of my plan. She knew I was a judge, of course, but she didn't know how HOA complaints were handled or that I often dealt with ridiculous disputes between neighbors who took minor issues and turned them into battles. My work required patience, calm, reasoning, and sometimes a bit of creativity when people refused to see each other's perspective, but this situation felt different. It wasn't two frustrated neighbors arguing. It was one person crossing lines simply because she liked the feeling of control. On Monday morning, I received an email from the HOA board. It was the typical, auto-generated message, confirming they had received the complaint filed by Karen and would be scheduling a formal review. They included a scanned copy of the photos she had taken my daughter strolling peacefully, looking at flowers, completely unaware someone was documenting her. My daughter looked over my shoulder and sighed. She really took that many pictures. She must have followed you for a bit, I said. Creepy, she muttered. I wasn't even doing anything. It's the irony, I replied. Suspicion without reason usually reveals more about the person making the complaint than the person being complained about. And my daughter gave me a look, the kind that meant she knew I was already thinking of something. You're planning something, aren't you? She asked. I'm planning, I admitted, to let the system work the way it's supposed to. She shook her head but smiled. You look way too calm for someone Karen is targeting. Let's just say, I replied, I've handled worse than an overzealous neighbor. For the next day or two, Karen behaved like she had already won some sort of victory. She walked past our house multiple times, always with that same self-important posture, chin lifted, clipboard tucked against her chest, like a badge of honor. She didn't speak to us. She didn't need to. The message was clear. She believed she was right, and she believed the HOA would be on her side. One afternoon, she even waved at my daughter with a stiff, awkward smile, the kind someone gives when they think they've caught you doing something wrong, but want to pretend they're being polite. My daughter just stared back, unsure whether to laugh or shake her head. By Wednesday, the HOA confirmed a hearing date. I was the judge assigned to handle it. Of course, the HOA didn't know this yet. They didn't pay attention to who reviewed which case until the day of. And Karen, despite all her obsessiveness, had no idea how deeply she had stepped into something she couldn't control. Do you want me to come with you? My daughter asked as I prepared documents. No, I said gently. This is something I should handle alone. Besides, you're not required to attend. But she's accusing me of something. Shh. She's accusing the idea of you, I said. The version she invented. Not the real you. My daughter nodded slowly. I trust you. Just don't go too hard on her. I smiled. I'll be fair. Fair is enough. When the day arrived, the hearing room was quiet, bright, and neatly arranged. A long table for the HOA board, chairs for complainants and respondents, and my desk at the far end. I always liked this room at .com. Neutral atmosphere helped diffuse tension. Karen entered right on time, heels clicking loudly, outfit pressed and tidy. She walked like someone stepping into a courtroom on a crime show, certain she was about to deliver a dramatic win. She carried a folder of printed photos, copies of emails, what looked like highlighted HOA rules. She didn't look at me at first. She marched straight to her seat, sat down, and organized her papers like she was preparing a thesis defense. It wasn't until the board members finished greeting each other and looked toward me that Karen finally glanced up, then froze, her eyes widened. She blinked. She blinked again. You, she said, pointing slightly before catching herself. You're the good afternoon, I said calmly. Let's begin. Karen sat straighter, but now with a confused stiffness instead of confidence. The HOA chair cleared his throat. We're here to review complaint number 47 filed by Karen regarding an unregistered individual staying at a residence and alleged suspicious behavior. Karen immediately leaned forward. Yes, thank you. As you can see in the photos, I held up a hand gently. We'll review everything in order. She clamped her mouth shut but nodded. We began by reviewing her written complaint. She had described my daughter as unidentified, potentially surveying homes, and walking in patterns typical of casing behavior. The wording was dramatic, almost theatrical. I had seen hundreds of complaints in my career. This one ranked near the top for exaggeration. Once the board finished reading, I asked her the first question. What specific action did you witness that led you to believe the individual was suspicious? Karen tapped her paper. She was walking slowly, looking around, taking her time. She had earbuds in, so she might not have heard if someone approached. Walking slowly, I repeated calmly, looking at her surroundings. Yes, Karen said firmly. That's suspicious. People usually walk with purpose. One board member raised an eyebrow. You mean, I said, that enjoying a walk is suspicious? Well, in combination with being unfamiliar, she said defensively. Yes. Did you speak to her? No. Of course not, Karen scoffed. I didn't want to risk my safety. Did she approach any houses? No. But she looked at them. Another board member had to hide a smile. I nodded and continued, keeping my voice steady. Did she step onto anyone's property? No. Did she interact with mailboxes, packages, or doors? No. Did she do anything that violated HOA rules? Karen hesitated, searching for something. She was unregistered. There is no policy requiring registration for short visits under 30 days, I reminded her gently. Karen bristled. Well, there should be, but there isn't. She opened her mouth, closed it, then folded her arms. Let's move to the next point, I said. You contacted law enforcement? Why? For safety, she exclaimed. If we ignore suspicious activity, we put everyone at risk. What crime did you believe was occurring? She faltered again. I didn't know, but something felt off. And when something feels off, I act. Without verifying facts? Facts aren't always obvious, she protested. Another board member cleared his throat. Karen, the officers reported no suspicious behavior. They said everything was normal. Karen's face flushed. Well, they weren't here long enough, and people know how to hide things. At that moment, her confidence began cracking. She kept looking at me as though hoping I would somehow validate her feelings. But I couldn't do that, not when her assumptions had created unnecessary trouble for someone who had done nothing wrong. After reviewing all the evidence, I finally spoke directly, calmly, and clearly. Karen! The individual you reported was my daughter. She lives at the residence you filed the complaint against. She had every right to walk in her own neighborhood. Her mouth dropped open. Your daughter, she whispered. Yes, and she was doing absolutely nothing suspicious or dangerous. Your report was based solely on unfamiliarity and personal assumption, not on any rule violation or factual concern. Karen swallowed hard, and for the first time, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. Furthermore, I continued, taking unauthorized photos of residents without their knowledge and filing exaggerated claims is a misuse of HOA procedures. The board members nodded. Your complaint, I said, gently but firmly, has no valid basis. It is dismissed. Karen stared at the table, her face stiff. Going forward, I added, please ensure that you observe actual rule violations or confirmed concerns before filing a report. The HOA exists to help the community, not to give individual members authority over others. We all want safety, but safety requires accuracy and fairness. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Karen finally gathered her papers. Though her movements were slower, less sharp, she didn't look anyone in the eye as she left the room. Her confidence had deflated, though I hoped not out of humiliation, but out of realization. The board thanked me for the clarity, unaware that I was also the one affected personally. When everything wrapped up, I returned home feeling a mix of relief and quiet satisfaction. My daughter was waiting on the porch, so she asked, "It's handled?" I said simply. She smiled. And Karen? She'll think twice next time she wants to police the neighborhood. We sat together for a while, enjoying the calm breeze. For the first time since she'd arrived, my daughter didn't look over her shoulder or toward the window. She looked relaxed again. The neighborhood felt peaceful, and Karen well. She didn't pass by our house with a clipboard anymore. Not that week. Not the week after. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally beginning to change. The week after the hearing felt lighter, almost like the whole neighborhood had taken a deep breath. My daughter noticed it too. She mentioned one afternoon that the tension she felt earlier seemed to fade, and she could finally enjoy her time at home. Without wondering if someone was peeking from behind curtains, she spent her mornings sketching on the porch, something she hadn't done in years. I loved watching her simply be herself again, free from the weight of Karen's assumptions. Even the neighbors acted differently. A couple of them waved more warmly when they walked by, perhaps relieved that someone had finally stood up to the overbearing HOA member who had caused so much quiet frustration. But while things seemed to settle on the surface, I knew the story wasn't over. People like Karen rarely changed overnight. They paused. They regrouped. And sometimes they returned with a new angle. I wasn't hoping for trouble, but I was prepared for the possibility. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and cast a warm glow across the street, my daughter and I were finishing dinner when we heard a soft knock at the door. Not urgent, not demanding, just a quiet, tentative knock. My daughter glanced at me. "Who do you think that is?" she whispered. "Only one way to find out," I said with a small smile. When I opened the door, I found one of our neighbors standing there, an older man who lived a few houses down. He was holding a small plate covered with foil. "Good evening," he said shyly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all. How can I help?" He shifted awkwardly before handing me the plate. "My wife made too many cookies, and we thought you and your daughter might like some." My daughter lit up. "Cookies?" "Absolutely," he chuckled. "She heard about what happened with Karen. Word gets around in this neighborhood quicker than you'd think. We just wanted to check in and say, well, thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely curious. He lowered his voice, as if afraid Karen might appear from behind a mailbox. "For standing up to her. Most of us have dealt with her for years, but no one wanted to push back. We didn't want to cause trouble. You handled it better than any of us could have hoped." I nodded politely. "I just did what was fair." "That's exactly it," he said. "Fairness." We needed that, said goodbye, and walked back toward his house, waving once before disappearing through his gate. My daughter smiled as she unwrapped the foil. "These look amazing." They were. But more than that, the gesture meant something deeper. It showed that people had been watching quietly, dealing with things silently, and hoping for someone to help restore balance later that night. As I stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea, I noticed someone standing at the end of the street. It was Karen. She wasn't carrying her clipboard. She wasn't wearing her usual strict expression. Instead, she stood still, almost uncertain, her hands clasped in front of her. For a moment, I wondered if she might walk over. But she didn't. She stood there for a few seconds, then turned around and went home. My daughter peeked out through the screen door. Was that her? It was. I said, "Do you think she's okay?" I thought about it for a moment. Maybe she's thinking. Maybe she's embarrassed. Maybe she's trying to figure out what happens next. My daughter nodded. "Do you think she apologized?" "I don't expect her to," I said honestly. "But people can surprise you." The next morning, I was in the backyard watering the plants when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line caught my eye instantly. HOA, community meeting, important updates. I opened it and saw that the board had scheduled a special meeting for the following week. They planned to review certain HOA policies, including complaint procedures and resident privacy guidelines. My daughter looked over my shoulder. "Do you think this is because of Karen?" "I think it's because the board finally realized the rules needed clarity," I replied. She smirked, which is a polite way of saying yes. I laughed softly. Possibly, though things seemed settled, the upcoming meeting hinted that the neighborhood wasn't done changing. People were ready to address issues they'd ignored for too long. And while I wasn't someone who sought attention, I also knew I had a responsibility to show up, to give my perspective as both a resident and someone who understood the importance of fair procedures. During the days leading up to the meeting, my daughter enjoyed small but meaningful moments walking the dog, reading outside, chatting with neighbors who suddenly seemed more open. She told me one evening, "It feels like the neighborhood is waking up." And she was right. Then, unexpectedly, something happened that neither of us saw coming. It was early afternoon when we heard another knock. This one was softer than the neighbor's visit, but more purposeful. When I opened the door, Karen stood there. Her posture was different. No clipboard. No sunglasses. No rigid stance. She looked almost human, a little tired, a little unsure. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence stretching thin. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello," I replied with equal calm. She cleared her throat. "May I speak with you?" Just for a moment, I stepped aside. Of course, she didn't step in. Instead, she stayed on the porch, glancing at her shoes before meeting my eyes again. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice steady but soft. "For the complaint. For the photos. For the assumptions. All of it. I shouldn't have done what I did. It was unfair. And I'm sorry." My daughter, who had been sitting inside reading, looked up in surprise. I gave her a small nod to let her know it was all right. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that," Karen swallowed. "I know people see me as controlling. Maybe I am sometimes. I worry about things more than I should. And instead of dealing with my own fears, I try to control everything around me. I see now that I crossed a line." My daughter stepped closer to the doorway. "I didn't want trouble," she said simply. "I was just visiting." Karen nodded quickly. "I know. Believe me, I know. And I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome. You didn't deserve that." My daughter gave a small smile, not forced, but understanding. "Thank you for saying that." Karen took a deep breath. "The HOA meeting next week. I'm going to tell them I was wrong. I want to support clearer rules so no one else gets treated like that." That surprised me, not because she wanted to fix things, but because she said it with genuine sincerity. "I think that would help the whole community," I said. She nodded again, stepped back, then added quietly, "And thank you for being fair at the hearing. You could have embarrassed me. You didn't now remember that." She turned and walked away, not with the proud stride she used before, but with a more natural pace. My daughter and I watched her go. "Do you think she meant all that?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "People don't always show their best sides, but everyone has more than one layer." My daughter leaned on my shoulder. She seemed different. She did, I agreed. Sometimes accountability brings reflection, and reflection brings growth. The following days felt peaceful again, but in a new way this time, with a sense of healing rather than avoidance, a kind of quiet reset. When the night of the HOA meeting arrived, the community hall was fuller than usual. People chatted with each other, whispering updates and opinions. Some seemed curious. Others seemed nervous. But most looked hopeful. I took a seat, like everyone else. Not in the front, not in the back. Just part of the community. Karen arrived a few minutes after I did. Instead of sitting near the board, or standing tall like she usually did, she took a seat among the regular residents. The board opened the meeting with standard updates before moving on to policy changes. Then they invited residents to speak. Karen stood up. Slowly, the room quieted. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began speaking, not with authority, but with humility. "I want to address something important," she said. "Recently, I filed a complaint that was based on fear instead of facts. I overreacted. I made assumptions, and I created unnecessary trouble for a neighbor and her family. I'm not proud of that, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again to me or anyone else." A few people exchanged surprised glances. She continued. "I'm asking the board to consider adding clearer guidelines on privacy, on what counts as a valid concern, and on how we should approach residents before filing complaints. I think we need to focus on communication, not control." It was the most honest I had ever seen her. When she finished, a couple of neighbors nodded. One even clapped softly. Karen stepped down and returned to her seat looking relieved. The board discussed her suggestions seriously. They agreed to revise several policies, including photo restrictions, clearer complaint procedures, and guidelines encouraging its neighbors to talk to one another before involving the board. The meeting ended with an unexpected sense of unity. As my daughter and I walked home together, she said, "I never thought I'd see the day when Karen actually listened to reason." "Sometimes," I said, "people just need a moment to see themselves from another angle." She looked up at the night sky and breathed in the cool air. I'm glad things turned out this way. Me too, I said. Fairness doesn't just solve problems. It opens doors for change. And in our quiet little neighborhood, change had finally begun, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through honesty, accountability, and the simple belief that people can do better when given the chance. When I walked back inside the house after speaking with the deputy, the first thing I felt was relief. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because the situation finally seemed to be settling. My daughter had calmed down, and even though she was still annoyed, at least she wasn't shaking anymore. I could tell the noise outside had faded, and for a moment, the house felt like it was taking a deep breath along with us. She sat on the sofa, curled up with a blanket, staring at the window as if expecting the HOA woman to pop up again. I sat beside her and gently tapped her shoulder. Hey, I said softly. You're okay. No one's coming after you. She nodded but didn't look at me. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just visiting. Why does she hate me so much? She doesn't hate you, I said, choosing my words carefully. Some people just like control. They think rules exist so they can enforce them, not so everyone can live peacefully. She finally looked at me. But calling the cops? Dad, that was crazy. I nodded. Yes, it was. And it wasn't your fault. The officer knew that too. For a moment, we just sat quietly. I didn't want her to think about the HOA woman anymore, so I tried to switch the mood. Listen, I said, bumping my shoulder gently against hers. How about we order something good for dinner? She didn't smile exactly, but her expression softened. Maybe. I pulled my phone out, pretending to scroll dramatically to lighten the mood. Pizza? Burgers? Something with too many calories and not enough vegetables? She finally let out a small laugh. Pizza. Always pizza. That was enough for now. I stood up to place the order. But before I left the room, she said quietly, Dad, thanks for being calm out there. I know you were upset. I paused. She wasn't wrong. I had been upset. But being a judge had taught me something important over the years. Reacting emotionally rarely solves anything. People only listen when you stay steady. I'm always going to be on your side, I said, and I'm not afraid of her. She nodded, and I went into the kitchen to order dinner while waiting for the delivery. I stepped onto the back patio to clear my head. The air was cooler now, and the yard was quiet except for distant voices from other houses. For a neighborhood that was supposed to be peaceful, it amazed me how much trouble one person could create. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning to confront her again unless necessary. But I had a job, a responsibility. And that included making sure my daughter and everyone else felt safe in their own homes. And right now, that wasn't happening. My phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it immediately. The deputy. Hello. I answered. Judge, just checking in, he said politely. Wanted to let you know I filed my notes, including the part about the HOA complaint being unfounded. Should help if anything else comes up. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, he added. The HOA woman didn't seem very happy when I reminded her that calling law enforcement for non-emergencies isn't something we take lightly. I just thought you might want to know. There was a pause. Have a good evening, he said before hanging up. I stood there for a moment, letting that sink in. I didn't take pleasure in anyone being uncomfortable, but I also wasn't blind to the patterns. If she had been warned, but chose not to listen, it probably wouldn't be the last time she stirred up trouble. The patio light flickered. I should have fixed it months ago. I went back inside. Dinner arrived. My daughter and I ate in the living room, watching a show she loved. I barely paid attention to the screen, but hearing her laugh made me feel better. The day had been long enough, and I didn't want to give the HOA woman any more space in my mind. After dinner, I cleaned up, and she went to her room to call her friends. It was finally quiet, at least for a little while. A sudden knock at the door broke the calm. Not loud, but sharp. Purposeful. My daughter peeked out of her room. Is that her again? Stay inside, I told her gently. I walked to the door and opened it just enough to see who was standing there. It wasn't the HOA woman. It was one of the HOA board members, man in his late 50s. Holding a folder and wearing an uncomfortable smile. "Evening," he said cautiously. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I opened the door a little wider. "Not at all." "Everything okay?" He cleared his throat. I heard about what happened earlier?" Of course he had. News traveled faster than the wind in this neighborhood. "I wanted to speak with you privately," he continued. "May I?" I stepped aside to let him in. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the room like he was nervous to even be here. "Please, sit," I said. He lowered himself onto the chair near the entryway. "First," he said, "I want to apologize for her behavior. We didn't authorize what she did today. She tends to act on her own, and it's been causing problems for a while. That tract." "I understand," I said. "But calling the police on a visitor is more than a misunderstanding." He nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "I agree. And honestly, we're worried she might create bigger issues if we don't handle it properly." I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to hear where this was going. He opened the folder and slid a paper toward me. "We're addressing it internally," he said. "This is a formal notice we plan to send her. But before we do, we wanted to make sure you didn't have any objections. We also didn't want her to twist the story again." I read the paper. It wasn't harsh or unreasonable. It simply documented that she had overstepped her role, misused HOA authority, and created unnecessary conflict. "This is fair," I said. The man looked relieved. "Good, good. We don't want trouble, and we certainly don't want anyone feeling unsafe in their own home, especially not your daughter." I appreciated that he brought her up gently instead of making it sound political. He shifted in his chair. "If you have concerns, or if she bothers your family again, please come directly to me. We'll take care of it without the need for anyone else getting involved." I nodded. "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." Stood. "Again, sorry for tonight. Have a peaceful evening." I walked him to the door and watched as he headed down the driveway. For the first time all day, I genuinely believed the situation might calm down. But then I saw movement near the street. She was standing outside her house. The HOA woman, arms crossed, staring, not at the board member, not at her house. At me, her posture wasn't aggressive, but it also wasn't apologetic. It was the kind of stance someone takes when they believe they're right, even when they've clearly crossed a line. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. I simply closed the door. My daughter peeked around the corner again. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Just someone from the board stopping by." She hesitated. "And her?" "Ignore her," I said. "She's trying to get a reaction. We're not giving her one." She nodded slowly and went back to her room. I took a deep breath. I hoped this was the end of it. I really did. But something told me this woman wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The next morning, sunlight filled the house. It felt like a normal day again, or at least it tried to. My daughter was getting ready to leave, and I was making coffee while keeping an eye on the clock. "Don't forget your bag," I reminded her as she walked toward the door. "Got it," she said, giving me a small smile when she stepped outside. I followed behind to lock the door. She made it halfway down the walkway before stopping. She turned around. "Dad." Her eyes were wide. I hurried toward her. Then I saw it, a note taped to my car windshield. A bright, bold note, written in rushed handwriting, and even from where I stood, I could read the first line clearly. "Visitors must be registered. This is your final warning." My daughter looked at me nervously. "Dad, is this from her?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't have to, because deep down, we both knew exactly who wrote it, and that meant one thing. She wasn't stopping. Not yet. Not even close. The moment I saw the note on my car, something inside me tightened. Not anger exactly, more like a firm understanding that this situation wasn't going away on its own. My daughter stood beside me, her backpack hanging loosely from her shoulder. Her expression, a mix of confusion and worry. I didn't want her to start her day feeling stressed, so I forced a steady breath. "Don't worry," I said gently, peeling the note from the windshield. "I'll handle it." She looked up at me as if trying to judge whether I was saying that for her sake or because I truly felt calm. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Absolutely. Go on." "You'll be late." She hesitated before finally walking toward the sidewalk. I watched until she rounded the corner. Only then did I let my shoulders relax. The handwriting on the note was rushed. It's almost messy, the kind of writing someone uses when they're angry and want to make a point as quickly as possible. I didn't need a signature to know who it was from. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. There was no reason to give her the satisfaction of seeing it in my hand. The morning air was cool, sky calm, everything peaceful, except for the knot of irritation forming at the back of my mind. I walked back inside, locked the door, and set the folded note on the dining table. For a moment, I just stared at it. There was a line between enforcing rules and harassing people. And she had crossed it again. Not because she cared about the rules, but because she cared. It's about control. And she didn't know when to stop. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the warmth steady me. The quiet of the house helped me think. I had options, plenty of them. But I wanted to be fair. I wanted to handle this the way I'd expect anyone to handle a minor but persistent problem. Still, I couldn't let her keep bothering my daughter after a long moment. I reached for my phone and dialed the HOA board member who'd visited the previous night. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning," he said cautiously, like he wasn't sure which way the conversation might go. "Morning," I replied. "I wanted to let you know something happened." His sigh was immediate. "Please tell me she didn't do anything else." I unfolded the note as if he could see it through the phone. "She left a warning on my car this morning. Something about visitors needing to be registered. It was taped to my windshield." My daughter saw it. He muttered something under his breath. "I'm so sorry. This is exactly what we were afraid of." "I'm not asking for anything dramatic," I said, "but I do need it to stop." "You're absolutely right," he replied quickly. "I'll call an emergency board meeting today. We'll address it." I appreciated his willingness to step in. He genuinely seemed to want to fix the issue rather than avoid it. "Keep me updated," I said. "Of course." We hung up and I leaned back in my chair, staring at the sunlight coming through the window. I hoped, genuinely hoped, that a calm conversation or a formal warning would finally settle things. But a part of me already knew it wouldn't be that easy. Around mid-morning, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Not because I wanted to run into her, but because I needed some time to think. The sidewalks were quiet. Most people at work or keeping to themselves. As I walked past her house, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small camera mounted on the corner of her garage, a new one. Its angle pointed directly at the street, but also at my driveway. I stopped for a moment. Pretending to check my watch so it wouldn't look like I was staring at her property, the camera wasn't against the rules. Many people had them. But given everything that had happened, it was hard not to feel like it was aimed at us intentionally. My phone buzzed in. My Paquita message from the board member. "Meeting. At 3 p.m. I'll update you afterward." I typed back a quick thank you and kept walking by early afternoon. I tried focusing on paperwork for my job, but my thoughts kept slipping back to the note, the camera, and the way she'd stood outside last night. Arms crossed, eyes fixed. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was escalating. My phone rang again around 3:45. The board member, "Hello." I answered. "It's done," he said without greeting. We held the meeting, and we voted to remove her authority to issue warnings or citations. Effective immediately, relief washed over me, though I tried not to sound too satisfied. "That's fair," I said. "Did she accept the decision?" There was a long pause. "She wasn't happy," he admitted. "But she didn't fight the vote. She left abruptly. Didn't say much." Quiet moment hung between us. Then he added, "Please let us know if she contacts you again. And thank you for being patient. We're trying to keep the neighborhood peaceful." "I appreciate your help," I said. We said goodbye. I set the phone down. For the first time since the whole situation began, I genuinely felt lighter. Maybe now things would settle. Maybe she'd take the decision as a sign to step back. Maybe my daughter returned home later that afternoon. She walked in with the same cautious energy she'd had in the morning. But her shoulders relaxed a little when she saw me smiling. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," I said. "The board handled it. She won't be bothering you anymore." "Really? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be," I said. "You're safe." Her smile finally returned, the kind that reached her eyes. It reminded me why I was handling everything so carefully. She deserved to feel comfortable here. To feel welcome. To feel at home. We talked a little about her day. She seemed more relaxed than she had in days. And I made sure not to bring up the camera or the way the HOA woman had walked away from the meeting. No reason to stress her again. For the first time in a while, the house felt calm, peaceful, normal, at least for a few hours. That evening I stepped outside to check the mailbox. The sun was setting, casting warm colors on the houses. I pulled out a few envelopes, mostly bills and advertisements. Nothing out of the ordinary. But as I turned back toward the house, I noticed her standing in her yard again, not glaring, not yelling, just watching. Her face was unreadable. Not angry, not apologetic, just observing. Our eyes met for a brief second before I looked away and walked inside. I didn't want to invite a confrontation, but her stare lingered in my mind. It wasn't defiant. It was something else. Entirely, almost calculating. I locked the door behind me. I didn't tell my daughter she was outside. No reason to make her anxious again, but I made a mental note. Something wasn't sitting right. Later that night, after my daughter went to bed, I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the house. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. It was just a feeling. A sense that the day wasn't quite finished. Then I heard it. A soft thump on the front porch. Not loud, not alarming, just enough to break the silence. I stood slowly and walked to the door. When I opened it, the porch light flickered before turning on fully. Something small lay on the welcome mat. And envelope. Unlabeled, I looked around. The street was empty. Her house was dark. I bent down and picked it up. The envelope was thin, unsealed. I opened it right there. Under the porch light dot inside was a single sheet of paper typed short, just one sentence. "You may think you understand the rules, but you don't." My heartbeat slowed, not sped up, but slowed like my body was preparing itself to think, not react. I folded the paper and stared at the quiet street. The note wasn't threatening, not directly, but it wasn't friendly either. It was a message, a reminder, a hint that she wasn't done. Not because she had power, but because she couldn't stand losing it. I stepped back inside, locked the door again, and stood there for a moment in the quiet house. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't naive either. This wasn't over. Not yet. And if she planned to keep pushing, she had no idea how prepared I was to push back, calmly, legally, and with far more experience than she realized.